The empty chair was the first thing I noticed. Not a missing flower arrangement, not a wrong tablecloth color, a single empty seat at the head table where my grandfather's place card should have been sitting 2 days before my wedding. I remember standing there in the ballroom of the Magnolia House in Franklin, Tennessee, staring at a stranger's name in his place and feeling something in my chest go cold before I even understood why. I found my father by the catering table, calmly checking things off a clipboard like my entire life wasn't about to change in the next 60 seconds. "Dad," I said, "where's Grandpa's seat?" He didn't even look up. "We moved him to the back. It's better for everyone. Graham Calloway is going to be here, Savannah, the CEO of Atlas Freight. Half the executive board is coming. It's not the right image having your grandfather up front." "Image," I repeated. "He's not a prop, Dad. He's the man who raised me." "He was a school janitor," my father said, flat and practiced, like he'd said it 100 times in 100 boardrooms. "I love him, but there's a time and place." Something cracked open in my chest right then, because I finally understood something I'd suspected my whole life but never let myself believe. To my father, my grandfather's entire existence, his sacrifice, his kindness, everything he had ever given our family could be folded up and hidden in the back of a room so it wouldn't embarrass the right people. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. I want to tell you what happened next, but first you need to understand what my father was so ready to throw away. My grandfather's name was Harold Parker. Around town, people called him the Janitor, but he was actually the head facility supervisor for our entire county school district, a man deeply respected by every teacher, student, and staff member who ever crossed his path. Titles never mattered to him, though. While my parents built their careers, my father climbing the ladder at Atlas Freight Corporation and my mother selling multi-million-dollar homes over in Brentwood, it was my grandfather who showed up for me. He packed my lunches every morning, always with a little note tucked inside the napkin. He sat in the front row at every school recital, every science fair, every awkward middle school choir concert where I sang off-key and he clapped like I was Aretha Franklin herself. He fixed my bicycle chain more times than I can count and taught me how to change a tire on a gravel lot behind his church on a Saturday afternoon, patiently letting me strip a bolt twice before he ever touched it himself. I remember one night in particular, when I was maybe 11, crying at the kitchen table because I'd failed a math test and was terrified to show my parents. Harold sat down across from me, didn't ask why I was crying, just quietly pulled out a pencil and said, "Let's figure it out together." We stayed up past midnight at that table, and I found out years later that he'd never even finished college himself. He simply refused to let me feel alone in anything, ever. He used to tell me, "People remember how you treated them long after they forget your title." I didn't understand what that meant when I was a little girl. I understood it completely the day my father tried to erase him from a ballroom. As the wedding drew closer, I watched my parents take my wedding away from me, one decision at a time. It started small. My mother swapped out the florist I'd chosen for one she liked better because it would photograph nicer. Then the band I loved was replaced with an upscale jazz ensemble because it would impress the right people. Then the guest list, which I had built carefully around the people who actually mattered to me, suddenly doubled with names of board members and their spouses I had never met in my life. Eventually, I discovered they'd rewritten the entire reception schedule, rearranged the family portraits, changed the order of the toasts, and, of course, moved my grandfather's seat. I confronted my mother about it in her kitchen, and she looked at me the way she used to look at difficult clients during a walkthrough. "Savannah, honey, this is a big night for your father's career," she said. "You'll thank us later." "It's my wedding," I said. "It's an opportunity," she corrected. And I remember thinking I had never heard two people talk about my own life like it was a listing they were trying to sell to the highest bidder. So I did something that terrified me more than anything I had ever done before. I canceled every upgrade they had paid for. I called the original florist back. I returned every dollar my parents had spent. I kept only the venue because that one I had booked and paid for myself, with 3 years of savings from teaching second grade. And then something beautiful happened. My friends, my neighbors, my old teachers, even the mail carrier who had known me since I was 7 years old, all of them stepped forward. Mrs. Whitfield down the street offered flowers straight from her own garden. My best friend's mother baked the cake herself, refusing to accept a single dollar for it. People who had never asked me for anything gave freely because they loved me, not because they wanted something from my father's company. And Harold's name went back on that head table right where it belonged, right beside mine. Word travels fast in families, especially bad news dressed up as concern. My aunt called to tell me I was being selfish. My cousin said I was risking my father's promotion over one seating chart. Even my mother's oldest friend, a woman I had called Aunt Reese my entire life, told me to just let it go for one evening, that appearances mattered more than I understood at my age. One night, my phone rang 4 times in a row, each relative taking their turn trying to talk sense into me, as if sense meant agreeing to hide the person who raised me. For the first time in my life, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe I was turning a beautiful night into a battle over pride instead of love. But then Logan, my fiancé, took my hands one evening and said something I will never forget. Weddings are supposed to celebrate the people who loved you before anyone else was watching, not the people who only show up because someone else is. And when I called Harold in tears, he simply said, "Baby girl, don't you dare shrink yourself trying to make room for people who never made room for you." That gave me the strength I needed for what came next. The night before the wedding, during rehearsal, my father asked to speak with me privately in a small dressing room off the ballroom. He had one final offer. Harold could attend the ceremony, he said, but it would be cleaner, more appropriate, if he quietly skipped the reception. "You want me to ask my grandfather to disappear," I said, "so your coworkers don't see him." "I want this night to go smoothly," my father said. I told him no. That's when he walked past me into the ballroom and personally lifted Harold's chair away from the head table, muttering something about how executives didn't need to see the maintenance guy sitting beside the bride. What my father didn't know was that Harold was standing in the hallway. He had come to drop off a small gift for me, and he saw the entire thing happen with his own eyes. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply turned around and walked out to his truck alone, in the dark, without a single word. I watched him go from the window, and something inside me went completely still and completely clear all at once. I walked back into that ballroom, looked my parents in the eyes, and told them that if they walked out that night, they were welcome to attend my wedding, but only as guests. No special treatment, no control, no say in anything. They left without another word. The wedding morning arrived, and despite everything, it was beautiful. I asked Harold, not my father, to walk me down the aisle. I remember the small gasp that moved through the church when he appeared at my side instead of my father, but I have never in my life felt more certain about a decision. My parents came to the reception anyway, mostly, I suspected, because Graham Calloway was expected to attend, and my father wasn't about to miss the chance to shake his hand. The evening moved smoothly for a while. My father worked the room, introducing himself to executives, laughing a little too loudly at their jokes. My mother managed photographs like she was staging an open house for a magazine spread. And Harold sat quietly at the head table, laughing with Logan's family, completely at peace, completely himself. I was finally starting to relax when I noticed Graham Calloway stop mid-sentence across the room. His eyes had landed on my grandfather, and his entire expression changed. He walked straight toward our table, and the room slowly went quiet around him. "Mr. Parker," he said, standing in front of Harold with something like reverence in his voice. "After all these years, it's an honor to finally see you sitting where you belong." My grandfather looked up, surprised. "Graham, is that you?" "You remember me," Graham said, and his eyes looked wet. Harold smiled. "Skinny kid from logistics. You used to bring me coffee at 2 in the morning?" Graham laughed softly, then turned to face the room. 25 years ago," he said, "Atlas Freight was 2 months from bankruptcy. Nobody in the executive office could solve our shipping losses. But there was a facilities supervisor working nights, a man everyone overlooked, who redesigned our entire logistics system from scratch. His plan saved the company. It's the same system, updated but still standing at its core, that we run today." He paused, looking at Harold like he still couldn't quite believe it. "We offered him an executive position, a seat on the board. He turned it down, asked only for a small royalty share and to go back to the work that actually meant something to him." Then Graham said the words that silenced the entire ballroom. "There is no Atlas Freight without this man. There's no promotion for anyone in this room tonight without him." I watched my father's face drain of color. "I never knew," Douglas said quietly. It wasn't defiance in his voice. It was the sound of a man realizing the ground beneath him had never really been his own. Graham looked at him, not unkindly, but with a weight that landed harder than anger ever could. "That's because you never cared enough to ask who your father really was." Nobody said anything after that. Nobody needed to. Later that evening, when the DJ announced the father-daughter dance, the room turned toward my father out of habit. Instead, I walked past him. I stopped in front of my grandfather and held out my hand. "The only man who truly raised me," I said, my voice breaking, "deserves this dance." The room rose in applause as Harold took my hand, and we danced slowly while my father stood at the edge of the room, watching everything he had spent his whole life chasing quietly dissolve in front of him. Months later, life settled into something new. Harold started a scholarship fund for the children of custodians, cafeteria workers, and bus drivers across Tennessee so that other kids raised by people the world tends to overlook might have a fairer start. My father stayed at Atlas Freight, but the promotion he'd wanted so badly quietly went to someone else. Not out of punishment, but because everyone had finally seen the kind of man he truly was. My mother has been trying, slowly and imperfectly, to rebuild what she broke between us. I don't know yet if that will fully heal, but I know I'm no longer waiting for her permission to love the people who earned it. I still think about what my grandfather always told me. People remember how you treated them long after they forget your title. My father spent 30 years chasing a corner office. My grandfather spent his whole life quietly changing people's lives one small kindness at a time. In the end, it wasn't even close which one mattered more. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone in your own life who gave everything and asked for nothing in return, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the Family Revenge Tales so we can keep telling stories about the quiet people who deserve to be seen. And wherever you are tonight, remember this: the people who show up for you on ordinary days are the ones who deserve the seat of honor on your biggest ones. Never let anyone convince you that love should be hidden to make room for appearances. This story carries meaning beyond its emotional pull. It teaches that true worth is measured by character and consistency, not status or job titles, and that the people who show up quietly, day after day, often shape our lives more profoundly than those chasing recognition. It encourages respect for working-class labor and challenges the instinct to equate someone's occupation with their significance. It also speaks to the importance of standing firm in your values under family pressure, choosing authenticity over approval, and understanding that real justice often doesn't require revenge, only the truth finally being allowed to speak for itself.